To start, I just want to give some declarations of interest. My spouse receives income from a scholarly peer review management company, which he owns. I am an unpaid associate editor for Systematic Reviews journal, and I have an academic interest and hold CIHR postdoctoral fellowship in this area. And I identify as a woman of color, a mother, an early career researcher. So just to give you an overview, I wanted to give you an idea of some of the current issues with equity and integrity in scientific publishing, why does this matter, and how preprints can help. Research integrity, as defined by the UK Office of Research Integrity. It's defined as research, all factors that underpin good research and promote trust and confidence in the research process. And I highlighted trust here since this is the foundation of integrity, acting in a way that your actions can be trusted. And so this definition is from the UK. The US and Europe also have offices of research integrity. And notably in Canada, we don't have a body or an office to speak of, although we do have the Responsible Code of Conduct of Research framework that was developed by the Tri-Agency. And so this includes similar notions of integrity and as well as research ethics. So according to the UK definition, research integrity includes honesty when designing and carrying out research, accountability of all involved, transparency around methods, results, conflicts of interest, rigor in methods, analysis, and respect for all involved in research, including animals and the environment. And some of the threats to the integrity of research and to scientific publication are, I'm sure we're all familiar with this, these misconduct, so falsification, fabrication of research, plagiarized research, and these are underpinned by the pressure to publish the academic space or the scientist space. And so this can lead to cutting corners, salami slicing research. It can lead researchers to publish in journals that are not recognized or that don't uphold standards of integrity. Can lead to, has led to paper mills, which are organizations that will publish for a fee or send research that's often fake to journals for a fee, and as well as AI-generated text and images. And so this leads to research waste. So we know we've heard of this term reproducibility crisis. So it's possible that there's a lot of research out there that we're not able to replicate. It's not transparent. The reporting isn't complete. Research is also inaccessible much of the time, as well as the data and code from that research. And this all leads to research waste. Then there are undeclared conflicts of interest, and this can create bias when there are conflicts of interest present in research. And if these are undeclared, then you are not able to know that there may be bias present, and this erodes trust in research. As well, there are issues with peer review. So there's fraudulent peer review where there are peer review rings. People set up these fake email accounts and invite themselves. Maybe if you're an editor, invite yourself to be a peer reviewer on research that you've then submitted or your colleagues have submitted. There is peer review fails to detect integrity issues often, and the effects of peer review are uncertain. And so why is this important? Well, COVID brought public attention to the ongoing misconduct and errors that we as scientists know plague scientific research, but it really highlighted that. And there was a lot more detection than we would normally see of these issues. And so when the public and patients and other researchers, when we're aware of these issues or seeing a lot of fake research or this paper mills issue, then trust in science is lost. Then moving on to equity in health research, I couldn't find a definition that I liked and I wanted to talk about here. So I asked ChatGPT to concoct one for me, and then I edited it. But basically, this is kind of homogenizing a bunch of definitions. This is the principle and practice of ensuring that all populations, including those of all sociodemographic characteristics, have fair and equal access to participate in, benefit from, and to influence health research. This involves recognizing disparities and ensuring inclusiveness throughout the research process. And so some of the barriers to equitable scholarly discourse I've identified here are inequitable representation or participation in research. So when certain groups are consistently left out of the conversation or left out of participating in research, we are not able to know what we need to know. about them. So some groups are purposely excluded from research because we want to get the most homogeneous population, increasing the likelihood of finding an effect. Equally, some groups are systematically unable to participate in research because of accessibility barriers or geographic location. There are also cultural and linguistic norms in science. So English is the language of science, and that leaves a lot of people, researchers who do not use English as their native language, unable to communicate effectively and often let out of publishing altogether when the research is rejected from journals. There are also policy and regulatory barriers, and then there's the cost and accessibility of published research. So it can cost money to access research if it's behind a paywall, or it may cost money to even publish research if you'd like to be published in open access journals. And the fees for publishing health research are quite high. And so in medicine, there are 4 commercial publishers, which in 2013 accounted for about 50% of research articles in natural and medical sciences. And this number has likely increased because there have been various mergers and acquisitions since then. And one problem is that these publishers serve the English-speaking world, as I mentioned, and English is this primary language of science, so it leaves a lot of people out. Also, papers led by women authors conducted outside of North America, particularly in Africa and in lower impact journals, are actually more likely to report sex-based analysis. And so that is interesting. The research that is possibly most important to a large portion of the population is not published in high impact journals. And so why is equity important? Research done by diverse groups is more innovative. So it's more comprehensive, it's diverse. I explained women study women. They study sexual violence, issues that are important to women, better understanding of the benefits and risks and harms across all population groups. Also, it increases representativeness. So improved representation of public health. I mentioned women studying women. There's also researchers from certain parts of the world who have problems that affect them that are unable to study the research because the funds are not available. And so we see a lot of other researchers publishing research from their areas in journals that they can't access. There's also fair and just participation of research. So in research, so we talked about systematic exclusions and participation, and trust and engagement. So it's important to support implementation of research in real life settings when you engage that community in the research itself. And so the combined importance of integrity and equity is who's getting published really affects what is getting published and ultimately who's benefiting from that research. And so some groups that are underrepresented in the scholarly literature are Global South researchers, Global South populations, non-native English speakers, women, and trainees and early career researchers. And so bringing this together in 2022, the World Congress on Research Integrity developed the Cape Town Statement as a way they provided recommendations for developing equity alongside research integrity. And so these really focused in on fair practices regarding setting research agendas and priorities, developing research questions, acknowledging contributions, diverse and inclusive collaborations, data availability and management, and publishing and accessibility. So we'll talk a little bit more about those throughout. And so I just wanted to give a case study here about Ebola research. So the often data collected in low and middle income countries are used and they're collected by researchers in those countries, but their authors, they make their data public, and then these authors, the data is used and the authors are not acknowledged as contributors. Then sometimes you will see 87% of research on Ebola was done by non-African researchers. And this was paywalled to researchers in affected locations. So they were ineffectively not able to see the research that was relevant to the epidemic. And so in COVID, we saw that ready accessibility of research became very important. So the Wellcome Trust said that open access and rapid circulation of materials was necessary to save lives. And as the pandemic ramped up, over 50 publishers and probably many more now have agreed to make COVID research freely available and accessible. And so I wanted to start talking about preprints because this became something that we considered that people started to do during COVID was publish preprints. And so preprint is a scholarly manuscript posted by authors in an openly accessible platform, usually before or in parallel with the peer review process. And just to give a small comparison of preprints and traditional publishing, so preprints are not peer reviewed, and that's often very explicit, made explicit by the preprint server. That'll be in part of their policies that they are not peer reviewed, or it'll be also be on each preprint that you view, you'll see a marking saying this has not been peer reviewed. Whereas in traditional publishing, we know that manuscripts undergo peer review. Preprints are immediately available, whereas in traditional publishing, there's often a delay after journal handling. So that includes peer review, revisions, not to mention rejections that happened, and then journal production. That can be 6 to 9 months in health research. Preprints are open to community feedback in ongoing fashion, whereas with traditional publishing, we're typically reviewed by 1 or 2 peers, and then the article is published. Preprint servers are free to publish in. There are no fees, as there are in open access journals, which can create some inequities in who's able to participate in open access, and preprints are freely accessible. So traditional journals, some of them, or they originated as paywalls, as subscription journals, and this creates inequitable access to research. And when there's inequitable access, it really affects who can participate in the conversation. So when you can't access research, you can't read it, you can't participate. And so I want to talk about the evolution of preprints. They began in physics in 1991, and it became the norm to share unpublished research so that researchers could collaborate and receive feedback from their peers before submitting to journals. And often it would be a number of months or years before submissions to journals will take place. And so that was in 1991, and really preprints came along in the last decade. So between 2013 and 2018, at least 18 preprint servers were launched across various disciplines. And the first dedicated biomedical preprint server, medRxiv, was only launched in 2019, which is surprising. And these are just a few examples of the most popular preprint servers in their respective fields. And of course, there are others. The Center for Open Science hosts preprints, preprints.org, and some journals have their own versions of preprint servers. So journal and preprints, there are PeerJ preprints, which was, PeerJ is a journal. They used to have a preprint server. It closed in 2019. The F1000, the model here is, this is not so much a preprint model. It's you actually pay to submit your preprint, which then is published after some checks to ensure that the research is ethical, a few validity checks, plagiarism checks, and then the research is peer reviewed. And this all happens in very open fashion, but it's sort of integrated into the journal model rather than a separate preprint server. The Lancet has preprints, and then there's this In Review, which is an integrated preprint server. So this is available in Springer Nature journals, and it provides an option when you're submitting to the journal to directly post to a preprint server. And that's Research Square in this case, and it provides updates in real time as to the status of peer review within a journal. And the neat thing is, if the journal then rejects your manuscript, that manuscript stays on the preprint server. And so, why did preprints take so long to reach medicine? Some of you may have heard of this Ingelfinger rule, where Franz Ingelfinger decided that researchers were not going to be allowed to disseminate their findings prior to publication so that journals could retain that newsworthiness of research. And editors worried that they'd see less submissions from researchers if preprints were allowed. And it appears that at least 2/3 of preprints are published. And of course, accounts for some publishing delays, but there are still publishing delays. So it may in fact be more than that. And of course, then with medicine, there are more serious implications of untrustworthy research. There's a perception that peer review that journals do can really increase the trustworthiness of research. So preprints and peer review, you may be wondering, and thinking, preprints don't offer peer review. So what do we know about that and what is happening there? So some preprint servers, the majority of them, according to a 2020 study, they included 44 preprint platforms, and about 75% of them indicated performing basic checks on articles. So they looked at the scope of the article, whether that was relevant to the mission of the server, plagiarism, and of course, legal, ethical, and societal issues. There are a few preprint servers perform checks by people, so experts, on unfounded medical claims. So they ensure that, or they try to ensure that there are not unfounded medical claims being published in preprint servers. And Research Square often also enables the accompaniment of a checklist so that the article would adhere to certain criteria. And 75% of preprint servers have a mechanism for commenting. And then, of course, there's also community-driven platforms for commenting on not just preprints, but also on journal articles. So PubPeer is a community-driven platform launched in 2012 for posting comments or discussions about articles or preprints. And the idea is that would be a journal club sort of thing online. And it allows for comments to be made anytime after an article is published. And so if you don't already know, there is a web plugin for PubPeer, which you can download your browser, and it pops up with this, I've circled it in red, this blue bar when a PubPeer comment exists for an article. So this is actually, PubPeer has become a key whistleblowing platform since it actually allows users to comment anonymously without fear of professional repercussions. And it has led to some high-profile retractions, as well as prompted journals to change some of their policies. Sciello has a preprint server through ASAP Bio, which encourages crowds of reviewers. So they'll create these communities of reviewers and then have preprints open to discussion for a set time period. And then there's pre-review, which is a journal independent community sourced peer review platform. And this has been integrated into many preprint servers, and it enables these concise rapid reviews or a longer peer review, which are linked directly to the preprint record on a server. And just to show you what that might look like, was from medRxiv, and there's this little dashboard down here in yellow, so you can already see the PubPeer comments on this article. There's a dashboard. If you click on that, you'll see the many comments that exist, and this is across different platforms that enable comments, not just PubPeer. And so what I want to show here was that preprint servers during COVID hosted almost 25% of COVID-19 research. But getting back to this issue of equity and who's publishing and who's contributing to scholarly research, a 2020 study of preprint contributions before and during the COVID-19 pandemic showed a steep drop-off in medical research papers published by women first authors at the start of COVID compared to the average. And this still hadn't recovered by December 2020, which is the data, the last data presented here. And so preprints can support research integrity and equity in several ways. So first off, we know that there's consistent reporting between preprints and their published articles, with few changes between them with regards to the message and the primary outcomes that are reported. Preprints are also a potential source of small and unpublished studies or studies that would otherwise not be available. And so this can help us to fill the gap when we think of publication bias and really think of smaller effect sizes that seem to be unimportant to journals. Also, if they enable early feedback and peer review. So, you've heard of like a lot of rejections happening, especially early career researchers. It helps people to refine their research and maybe get into journals a bit quicker. And it increases it can help to increase the representation of authors from low and middle income countries and other underrepresented groups on the scholarly record. So what are the problems with integrity and equity that preprints can solve? So they can help with rapid dissemination, which helps with the integrity of research. We have a more complete, a quicker, more complete set of research around a particular topic. It can help researchers establish priority in a certain area. They don't have to wait for that peer review. If they have an interesting finding, they can pop it onto a preprint server. It's free to submit and to access for researchers with inequitable representation. And it has the potential to here, unfortunately, I put it in very small print, but to reduce submissions to predatory journals by groups who often submit to these in higher numbers than others. So it offers this free mechanism for publishing. They're discoverable and permanent. They have DOIs, and they often have agreements with archiving services, so they are permanent. Even if that server doesn't exist anymore, like the PeerJ preprints, they're Preprints will live on in perpetuity. It fosters cross-disciplinary and international collaboration by enabling people to comment and talk to each other at earlier stages of research. It also gives researchers autonomy, so researchers can decide when and how to publish their research. It has the potential to facilitate detection of and reduce publication bias because of the high acceptance rate. And it may incentivize better research quality. So this public visibility of research on preprint servers may encourage people to have better research practices or better research reporting practices. And so what problems can preprints not solve? This idea of the core versus periphery, there's a set of people who are known to publish and be in the center of publishing. This, as I mentioned, English language speakers, Western countries, men from these countries. And so then there's a periphery of research. So preprints can help to shift that. But there's still going to be a core and periphery of who's even submitting to preprint servers. It can help on quality control and for controlling misinformation. We mentioned those commenting services that people are able to use to alert readers to problems with the research. And it can't solve this problem of lack of formal peer review, which is when we talked about earlier, the trust in science. This is really important for public trust. And so also the result of rapid COVID research and publication, many journals and publishers and societies were first forced to devise these policies around how to handle preprints. So if you recall that Inglefinger rule, although that's an artifact from days gone by, many journals still upheld that view, especially in medicine. So once COVID arrived, that was really all out the window. Journals had no choice but to support and integrate preprint servers into their workflow. So it's just an example why other publishers have gotten on board. And if you wanted to learn more about journal policies on preprints and what's allowed, you can go to the Sherpa Romeo. And this database, it will give you information about most journals and publishers. And also funders have policies about preprints. So many large funders, both government and foundations, have begun to consider preprints as a contribution in the evaluation of research proposals, even if they're not yet published. And so this was quite exciting. So we saw there are foundations, there's NIH has agreed to include draft preprints and grant proposal and consider those as appropriate contributions. CIHR, as a signatory of DORA, they say that they accept the inclusion of preprints in grant applications as interim research outputs. So that's encouraging. Another thing another benefit, I guess, is for early career researchers. The potential consideration of preprints by institutions and funders would really help to empower early career researchers, especially those from marginalized groups, to demonstrate their productivity and to compete in hiring and very competitive hiring and reward systems. So when we're faced with large journal publishing delays up to 9 months for health research and potential rejections from multiple journals, preprints are a nice opportunity to help early career researchers demonstrate their productivity in the interim. After a year, this is another case study here, after years of funding article processing charges, the Gates Foundation announced this April that they would no longer be doing that and that all of their funded research must be made available instead as a preprint as the mandatory output from January 2025 onwards. So no longer are publications required, open access publications, but instead they must have their research available as a preprint. And they will be launching their very own preprint archive where the research must pass a set of 20 different ethics and integrity checks, including plagiarism, image manipulation, verification of authors and competing interests. And in addition, we'll be doing research transparency checks, and we'll check whether or not data is available in an appropriate repository and that the methods have been included to support reproducibility. So they're really big on this research integrity. And so each preprint will also then in this archive you'll be able to see which of the integrity checks it has passed. And so there have been many calls for institutions to end this detrimental publisher perish culture by shifting what's evaluated and rewarded in research assessment. And so ASAP Bio, which is a nonprofit scientist-led organization that encourages, they educate and develop policies on preprints and preprint adoption. They have proposed actions at a recent community meeting that institutions can take to position preprints as worthwhile scientific contributions. So, for instance, funding, like the funding agencies, institutions can consider preprints in evaluations. They can develop mechanisms to adjudicate quality. They can help to improve links with data protocol and others. So they're just some ideas of what can be done for institutions. And I just wanted to mention this here. While the NIH is a funder, they also host the National Library of Medicine, and also prompted by that large volume of COVID research, they initiated a pilot in 2020 where the NIH-funded COVID research was then integrated into PubMed and PubMed Central, enhancing its detectability by others. And in 2023, so last fall, they expanded this pilot to include all NIH-funded research, not just COVID study. So just for some final thoughts and recommendations, preprint servers can enable broader participation in research and scholarly discourse. Preprints may be worth considering in organizational equity, diversity, and inclusion efforts. They provide recognition to marginalized researchers, and integrity and validity checks must be further developed. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Larissa. This was a fascinating presentation. Maybe some of the audience remembers that you presented on predatory journals in our TI Meta speaker series, which also was very engaging and made us think a lot, which is one of the reasons we wanted you to come back and talk about this. So there are some questions in the chat. Tom Perry is asking, do the preprint names mean anything? Like, for example, medRxiv. And how does one pronounce them?
You did a great job. So yeah, the archive, a funny little way that they've done it. But I mean, the names seem to be related to topic area. There's bioRxiv for biomedical research, medRxiv for medical research. The original archive is for physics and computer science and math. I mean, that doesn't seem to be related to much, but there seems to be also related to the platform, and oftentimes it'll be Lancet preprints.
Thank you. There is another question from Guillaume, but Guillaume is asking, what do we know about the potential harms of preprints?
I mean, I think that the main thing is that they do not pass peer review. Their peer review may or may not happen externally, so researchers may or may not comment on preprints, and that obviously means that there has not been an external set of eyes on it. And so one of the harms is that we haven't done peer review on it. But I think the bigger question is, what is peer review doing? And there's some research to show that research doesn't change vastly between preprints and publications. There's also research I've been involved with. We looked at open peer review, where we were able to access the peer review and see whether or not the submitted version, how it compared to the published version. And again, these were open access journals, so maybe their policies and their standards were different, but really there weren't a ton of changes. So between submitted or preprints and published versions. So I think that's a question for the audience and even like the lay public, because we have this idea of we trust published research because of peer review, and what are some of the harms like that we ought to consider when we are developing policies around preprints.
Another question here, are peer review committees writing about this? Are they kind of writing about the whole phenomenon of preprints? And
definitely funders are definitely doing so. I don't know if like there are committees outside of funders. I think journals just find their own peer reviewers, but certainly funding organizations, a lot of them are speaking or writing about preprints right now. You could probably find a lot of information Googling the big funders. There's also the Coalition F, the European Coalition of Funders. They support preprints as well. So there is a lot being written about preprints, and not just written, but like there are policies that are being formed now.
Tom Perry is bringing up another question. He starts by saying emails can be overwhelming, even for someone who eschews social media. How would someone who has a full-time job handle lots of open-ended peer reviews available online? Have you any experience wading through them? Do they tend to be in single digits or ever get into the hundreds or even thousands for topics or research of high interest?
So I mentioned really briefly this idea of the whistleblowers, and there are these sort of academic sleuths who hang out on the internet to really just adjudicate research, or there may be certain researchers or areas of research that are flagged as interesting or potentially problematic or even risky, or there are high implications from research misconduct. And so there are these whistleblowers or sleuths who comment on preprints or even published research. And when a comment has been detected, I've not had experience with this, but see, when a comment has detected a problem, it seems that there are often multiple comments from other users. And just to note, these comments don't get sent necessarily to the journal if the research has gone on to be published in a journal. So it would be up to the author of the preprint or someone from the community who sees there's a lot of conversation happening to alert a journal to what's going on, and even to the institution of the authors who are involved in publishing that research. So I would say they tend to be in the 0 or single digits when we're talking about comments on preprints, but then there are instances where preprint comments can be in, I don't know if I would call it hundreds, maybe lower than that, but where you'd be able to, the noticeable difference between something that is flagged as interesting or problematic and not.
Raphael has a question, and although you touch on this in the presentation, but maybe you can elaborate a bit. Do you believe there is a barrier for journals to accept articles that were previously deposited on preprint servers?
I think that there used to be, and I think that we've come a long way during COVID because of the idea that we need to rapidly share research. And maybe some journals have walked that back because we're now out of the pandemic, and there's the rapid dissemination is maybe not as necessary. But I can't imagine that a journal would say we're not going to consider it at all. But I mean, it does seem that state still exists. There are journals who will not touch a manuscript that has been already published as a preprint. But so I believe there's a barrier for the journals. And the barrier is that they want that exclusivity. They want that single finger. They want that newsworthiness. They want to be the first ones to deliver that information. And when that is not the case, I guess that can be a real problem. I mean, one of the biggest drivers for journals is achieving high impact factors. And there is research I did not present here that shows that research that is published as preprints first go on to have higher citation rates and higher altmetrics. So there's a lot more conversation happening, and preprints and their publications are not linked. But often if a journal article is published behind a paywall, so it's a subscription journal, that researchers will go and see if there's a preprint, or there are tools that are built into, like plugins built into the web browser where you can find like an open access version of that article. And often that would be on a preprint server, and there are benefits too, I guess, is what I think.
And here's another question from Tom Perry, who says, after 46 years as a medical doctor, I have arrived at the point where I seldom believe anything I read in a medical journal research report. We all remember John Ioannidis' article on irreproducibility of results. In medical research, this often relates to the accuracy of ascertainment, reporting of clinically important outcomes. Then there is the issue of network meta-analysis, either enlighten us or simply reinforce BS or confuse us. Will we ever know whether preprint archives achieve a higher standard than existing so-called high-impact peer-reviewed journals? I'm not sure how one would study this.
A higher standard is interesting. I'd say the best we could do, or the best we ought to aim for, is trustworthiness of research, and to ensure that everything we read or that's publicly available fits that minimum standard of trustworthiness. And I know there are groups working on this. I'm involved with one of these groups, and there are a number of checklists and whatnot being developed. I think the biggest change or benefit that will happen to actually get these implemented will be technology and being able to automate some of this. But I mean, as we all know where we are with technology, we don't know what's happening behind the scenes with AI just yet. And once we're able to have more transparency there, it would be, I think, a phenomenal way to be able to do a quick trustworthiness check on research, pop out a checklist, and then we might be able to, have that beside every article.
Guillaume has another question. Did any of the big journals or editors try to prevent the development of preprint servers?
Oh, interesting. I don't know for sure that sounds very likely. So I'm not going to say yes or no. I don't know the literature on that. I do know that when preprints were actually first, the idea and concept of a preprint was first proposed in medicine in like the 60s at the NIH, and the NIH itself was a big block to preprints or to this conceptual idea of publishing, making research publicly available before it was published. And so that's as much as I know there. But if anyone else knows, please feel free.
I have a question too, and that is to the discoverability of preprints. So are they being indexed? How easy or difficult it is for someone to find this?
Yeah, so because preprints and these servers, they all have DOIs. They work with Crossref to assign DOIs. They're discoverable. And what I mentioned, they also are not just discoverable, but they're there permanently. So if a server closes, the preprint will remain available. It's because of these agreements with archiving services, different kind of archive, but archiving of the data and the metadata. So they should be available and discoverable. And then this indexing in PubMed Central, that'll further help discoverability of preprints.
I will join everyone else who is thanking you, Larissa. This was an excellent presentation, and I'm sure we'll probably invite you again.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.